Every year on Yom Kippur, we recite the Martyrology service, the Eileh Ezkerah, sections about different leaders throughout Jewish history who died because they were Jewish. A martyr, in essence, is someone who dies because of who they are. Someone who dies so others could live. Maybe someone who risked their own life. This hits especially close to home for us this past year as we reflect on the approximately 1,200 souls murdered just over a year ago on October 7th. We caution you that these stories are difficult to hear, especially because they hit so close to home. We cannot share every story, even if we mourn each life, but we share a few to remind us of our pain, of our grief, to remind us of the bitter course of our history. Eileh Ezkerah v'nafshi, Alai eshpecha, al korotenu, hamarot einai, zolgot dim'ah. These I recall, and my soul melts with sorrow. For the bitter course of our history, tears pour from my eyes. Eileh Ezkerah, for these I recall.
Eileh Ezkerah, v'nafshi alai eshpecha, al koroteinu hamarot, einai zolgot dim'ah.
Amit Cohen, 23, was attending the Nova Music Festival near Kibbutz Re'im on October 7th. When the attack began, he and his friends fled and made their way towards the highway. Yaniv Sudri had a full car, but stopped to let them in. Amit forcefully helped friends into the car and positioned himself on top of them to shield them from bullets. By the time they reached paramedics at Re'im, Amit had already lost too much blood. Everyone in that car miraculously survived, except for Yaniv Sudri, the driver who stopped to let more people into his vehicle, and Amit, who served as a human shield to protect his friends.
Eileh Ezkerah, for these I recall.
Eileh Ezkerah, v'nafshi alai eshpecha, al koroteinu hamarot, einai zolgot dim'ah.
Shlomi and Shachar Matthias were residents of Kibbutz Holitz when Hamas attacked their home. As terrorists began shooting, they jumped on top of their son Rotem and shielded him. They were murdered, but he survived. At their funeral, their son emphasized in his eulogy that even in their final moments, they died to save him, for they always put him first, always prioritized his safety, always prioritized helping him. Eileh Ezkerah, for these I recall.
Eileh Ezkerah, v'nafshi alai eshpecha, al koroteinu hamarot, einai zolgot dim'ah.
Angeline Aguirre, 34, was a newlywed from the Philippines who was working as a home health aide and caregiver in Israel. She had spent a great deal of time being the aide for Nira Ronen, age 86, of Kibbutz Kfar Aza. Nira, along with her husband Akiva, founded the border kibbutz in the 1950s. While Nira had difficulty moving around, Angeline could have easily fled for her safety, but she was Nira's caregiver and refused to leave her side. She was found dead, lying next to Nira, with her arms around her. Eileh Ezkerah, for these I recall.
Eileh Ezkerah, v'nafshi alai eshbecha, al koroteinu hamarot, einai zolgot ima.
Amir Manzoor Naim, 27, from Kibbutz Erez, was killed battling members of Hamas on his kibbutz on October 7th. A member of the kibbutz's local security team, Amir set out early that morning to join the rest of the team and repel the dozens of terrorists who were heading their way. We were hiding in our safe room, and as soon as Amir understood that something unusual was happening, he jumped up, got ready in 2 minutes, and went out to handle things. We didn't even have a chance to say a proper goodbye, his wife Shachar said. The team gathered at the highest point in the kibbutz, from which they could see 2 pickup trucks full of terrorists heading their way. They opened fire, and a ferocious gunfight ensued. With grenades, RPGs, insane gunfire. In the battle, his wife said, Amir was wounded and died in my arms. Nobody else in the kibbutz was killed, as the security team successfully repelled the Hamas invasion. Eileh Ezkerah, for these I recall.
Eileh Ezkerah, v'nafshi alai eshbecha, al koroteinu hamarot, einai zolgot ima.
Mordechai Modi Amir, 67, was murdered by Hamas in his home in Kibbutz Kfar Aza. When he realized that terrorists had invaded the kibbutz, he instructed his 2 daughters and granddaughter to hide in the shower that he had built in their reinforced room. He decided to stay in the main section of the room, knowing he was unable to lock the door, just hoping that the terrorists would believe he was there alone. When the terrorists entered the home, they killed Modi in his safe room, his body blocking the bathroom entrance, saving the lives of the rest of his family. His daughters and granddaughter were rescued and evacuated from the kibbutz almost 24 hours later. His son-in-law said that Modi's actions on October 7th were a deliberate decision for what was best. It cost him his life. This is how he saved his daughters and granddaughter. He was a man who was quick thinking, who always knew how to find the most practical solution, and that's what he did in those moments. Eileh Ezkerah, for these I recall.
Eileh Ezkerah, v'nafshi alai eshbecha, al koroteinu hamarot, einai zolgot ima.
Tatiana Schnitzman, 70, was an only child and didn't manage to have children of her own. She devoted all of her love and care to her husband, Vladimir, and to the garden that she grew in their yard. Tatiana was known for her love of plants. She grew fruits, rare succulents, and decorative plants. Born in 1953 near Moscow, she married Vladimir in 1983, settling in Leningrad. The couple moved to Israel in 1991, settling first in Kiryat Malachai, then in Kiryat Gat, and then putting down roots in Ofakim in 1994. She made sure to get the most out of every day by organizing trips, which is the last thing she did on October 7th, the day she was murdered. Tatiana was taking part in an organized day trip to the Dead Sea that morning when the minibus carrying the group got a flat tire and stopped in Sderot. The group of pensioners aboard the minibus were standing outside when air raid sirens began. But the bus stop bomb shelter, which was supposed to automatically open during a siren, remain electronically locked. Moments later, a pickup truck of terrorists drove by and shot dead all 13 travelers. Only the driver emerged alive. Photos of the group of pensioners lying dead around the bus stop were among the first to circulate that morning, shocking Israelis and the world with the brutality of the assaults. Eileh Ezkerah, for these I recall.
Eileh Ezkerah, v'nafshi ala yesh becha, al koroteinu hamarot, einai zolgot ima.
Asaf Asi Schlesinger, age 57, from Rosh Ha'ayin, was murdered at the Supernova Music Festival. Asaf attended the rave not as a partygoer, but as a paramedic and the head of the festival's medical response team. When the rocket fire began that morning, Asaf texted his wife that they were shutting things down, and he would call when he was on his way home. Around 9 a.m., he called her and said, "Don't worry, I'm fine, but I can't talk. I'm treating the wounded." That was the last she heard from him. Asaf stayed at the festival site, caring for the wounded and evacuating the injured, until he himself was shot dead by terrorists. During his mandatory IDF service, Asaf had served in the Golani Brigade as a combat medic. After his release, he continued along the same path, training and working as a paramedic. Asaf and his wife Galit met when he accompanied a patient in the ambulance to the hospital where Galit was working. They married in 1989, had their twins in 1995. At his funeral, his wife Galit eulogized him with these words: "The fact that he was saving lives until his last moment is who you were and what you always did." Eileh Ezkerah, for these I recall.
Eileh Ezkerah, v'nafshi ala yesh becha, al koroteinu hamarot, einai zolgot ima.
Eliakim Shlomo Liebman, 23, was a security guard at the Nova Music Festival. For 7 months, he was presumed to be held hostage in Gaza, as no remains had ever been identified in Israel. But in May of this year, following an investigation, his remains were confirmed to have been accidentally buried alongside those of Victoria Brandis, who was also slain at the hospital. Both Eliakim and Victoria were working as security guards at the rave that morning. They were both believed to have been killed while hiding in or next to an ambulance at the scene that was struck by a grenade, burning those inside beyond recognition. According to his family, Eliakim stayed behind for hours treating other wounded people until he himself was killed. His sister Amuna said his family wasn't surprised to hear that he had been helping others at the festival, since he couldn't stand watching a situation where anyone was hurting someone weaker than them. Eileh Ezkerah, for these I recall.
Eileh Ezkerah, v'nafshi ala yesh becha, al koroteinu hamarot, einai zolgot ima.
Bilha Inon, 75, and her husband Yaakov Inon, 78, were murdered in their home in Netiv HaAsara. The couple's house was completely burned down in the Hamas onslaught. While Yaakov's remains were identified a few weeks later, Bilha was officially considered a missing person until August, when the military announced that a complex examination and investigation procedure enabled them to confirm that she had been killed. Her family had long accepted that she was gone and had set Shiva for both Bilha and Yaakov back in October. Bilhah and Yaakov were survived by their 5 children and 11 grandchildren. The house got a direct hit and was on fire within minutes. This was a house built with light materials like plaster and plywood. The couple's children emphasized that their parents were lifelong peace activists who believed in reaching out and building bridges. Ma'oz Inon, their son, said that even in unthinkable times, he's continuing to pursue the path of peace as part of my mom's legacy. And I'm taking it for my mom. I'm taking it for my father. We will always have reasons to hate, but I'm saying one day we'll have to start using the power of reconciliation, the power of forgiveness. Eileh Ezkerah, for these I recall.
Eileh Ezkerah, Benafshi Allah yesh becha, al koroteinu amarot, einai zolgot ima.
Tal Karen, 17, from Nativ Hassara, was murdered at Zakim Beach. A high school student, Tal set out for the beach early that morning with 2 friends, Nadav Tayeb and Ora Tasa, to fish along the coast. All 3 were murdered in the same attack. In a final voice note sent just before his death, Tal said, "You won't believe it. We're seeing rockets exploding in the water right before our eyes, 5 meters from us. Flying in the sky, boats fighting other boats. It's insane. I've never seen anything like this." His sister shared on Instagram a photo of the 3-word note he left behind at home when he set out early that morning. "I went fishing. Tal." The Zakim Beach, just a few kilometers away from Nativ Hassara, was Tal's second home. He loved to surf and went on regular fishing trips with his friends. For the past few years, Tal had worked on Fridays selling flowers from the Nativ Hassara at the farmer's market in Tel Aviv next to the port. With what he earned, he would fund his surfing trips. Eileh Ezkerah, for these I recall.
Eileh Ezkerah, benafshi Allah yesh becha, al koroteinu hamarot, einai zolgot ima.
Chava ben Ami, 78, was born in Aleppo, Syria, with the name Evelyn Yechezkel. In early 1948, amid violence and unrest in the period before the establishment of the State of Israel, she fled with her family on foot toward Israel. The family settled first in Holon, and Chava was later sent as a child to Be'eri to get an education after her mother remarried. There she was unofficially adopted by a family and remained there for close to 70 years. During that time, Chava worked in many different jobs in the kibbutz. Her daughter, Noam ben Ami Revach, said that she had told her mother to hide in a closet as terrorists were rampaging through her neighborhood. Around noon, Noam said that Chava texted her, "They were just in the house. I'm so terrified." And I told her, "Don't worry, we'll be there soon to get you out. I promise we'll be there soon. Somebody will get you out." Eileh Ezkerah.
Eileh Ezkerah, benafshi Allah yesh becha, al koroteinu hamarot, einai zolgot ima.
Eli Rafai, 42, and his sister Sharon Rafai, both from Yavne, were murdered near the Supernova Music Festival. Sharon, 27, was attending the festival with her boyfriend, Shachar Manzour, when Hamas began attacking them and another friend, Uriel Ricardo. When rocket fire started, the 3 left for their car. They had reached Mefalsim Junction when Shachar was shot, and the car flipped over. Sharon called her brother Eli in panic. He immediately set out to try and help her. Although when Sharon realized how many terrorists were lying in wait, she told him to turn back, but he wouldn't listen. When he neared the junction, he was shot by terrorists. The family believes Sharon was on the phone with him at the time and heard the gunfire. Her mother said she later spoke to her on the phone as she was trying desperately to escape alive. Sharon said she was sorry she called Eileh. Sorry, Mom, I ruined your life. We're going to try and escape, but I don't know if I'll make it out. That was the last her family heard from her. After several days, the family was informed that Sharon's body was identified. She was buried on October 12th. Days later, Eileh's body was identified, and he was buried on October 16th, right next to her. Eileh Ezkerah, for these I recall.
Eileh Ezkerah, Menachem Allah yesh becha, al koroteinu hamarot, einai zolgot ima.
Ori Arad, 22, from Cholon, was murdered at the Supernova Music Festival. Ori was working as a bartender at the rave when the attack began. He called his parents, told them about the rocket fire, and said he would be leaving soon. At 7:10 in the morning, his family said he called from his car where he was stuck amid the traffic and the slaughter along Route 232. He told his father that he felt he had no choice but to attempt to plow into the terrace with his car in an attempt to escape. That was the last they heard from him. 2 young women later tracked down by the family told them that Ori picked them up in his car after their own was totaled and told them, "Girls, I'm getting you out of here." When he floored it toward the terrace, they opened fire on the car, which flipped over. Ori was wounded and lost consciousness, while the women played dead in order not to attract attention. He later awoke, and the motion drew the eye of the terrorists, who fired again, killing him. The 2 women managed to survive until they were rescued 3 hours later. Eileh Ezkerah, for these I recall.
Eileh Ezkerah, Menachem Allah yesh becha, al koroteinu hamarot, einai zolgot ima.
Dikla Arava, 51, and her son, Tomer Arava Eliaz, 17, murdered at Kibbutz Nahal Oz. Terrorists stormed into the home of Noam Eliakim, Dikla's longtime boyfriend, whose 2 daughters, Daphna and Eileh, were also home. The terrorists cruelly forced Tomer at gunpoint to knock on the doors of their neighbors to try to convince them to come outside, all while live streaming on Dikla's Facebook page. Ultimately, Tomer, Dikla, and Noam were murdered. Daphna and Eileh were kidnapped to Gaza, where they were captive for 51 days before being released last November. Dikla and Tomer's bodies were only discovered and identified more than a week after the attack, outside the kibbutz grounds. Eileh Ezkerah, for these I recall.
Eileh Ezkerah, Menachem Allah yesh becha, al koroteinu hamarot, einai zolgot ima.
Carol Simantov, 70, was murdered in her home in kibbutz near Oz. On the same day, her son Johnny Simantov, as well as her daughter-in-law Tamar, grandchildren Shachar, Arbel, and Omer, were all murdered in their own home in the kibbutz. Carol's beloved puppy, Boxer, was also shot and killed by Hamas that day, her family said. A retired nurse, Carol was raised in Levittown, Pennsylvania, and made Aliyah to Israel when she was a 21-year-old newlywed and young mother. While her first marriage ended in divorce, she remarried Freddie Simantov, with whom she had 3 more children before he died in 1999. Carol's boyfriend of 5 years, Julian Cohen, who survived the attack on Nir Oz, said that the Simantovs welcomed me into their family. We celebrated together and traveled together, did Friday night Shabbat together. We were a family, and what we've lost is beyond belief. Eileh Ezkerah, for these I recall.
Eileh Ezkerah, Benafshi Allah yesh becha, al koroteinu hamarot, einai zolgot ima.
Mayor El-Harar, 58, and his wife, Liz Halfon El-Harar, 45, were murdered in their home in Kibbutz Holitz. The couple was shot dead the minute terrorists burst into their home. Their 7-year-old daughter, Adi, was found hiding in a closet and was rescued hours later. According to her sister, Liz managed, while fatally wounded, to get Adi into the closet and to call for help. When a neighbor arrived to rescue Adi, they had to move Liz's body away from the closet to open the doors. She bled to death on the floor in front of it, protecting her daughter. Eileh Ezkerah, for these I recall.
Eileh Ezkerah, Benafshi Allah yesh becha, al koroteinu hamarot, einai zolgot ima.
Moshe ben Porat, 58, from Tiberias, was murdered in Ofakim. He worked as a cook and a kosher supervisor in an assisted living facility in Tiberias. According to Army Radio, he loved to cook and bake while off the clock as well, and he specialized in Persian food. While his family knew he had been killed that day, his body wasn't identified for more than a week. Ben Porat had traveled to the city in order to attend the Brit Milah of his grandson. He was slain by terrorists while he was on his way to synagogue that morning. Eileh Ezkerah, for these I recall.
Eileh Ezkerah, Benafshi Allah yesh becha, al koroteinu hamarot, einai zolgot ima.
Reuven Hinnick, 56, of Ashkelon, was murdered at the dairy farm in Kibbutz Ksufim days after October 7th. Hennick, the longtime manager of the kibbutz's dairy, set out to Ksufim 2 days after this terrorist attack to tend to the cows. His family and friends begged him not to go, but he refused to leave the cows without care. He was shot dead by a terrorist who had been hiding out inside the barn. Ksufim's chairman, Gavri Bargil, said that the kibbutz was sealed off as a closed military zone, but Hennick asked to go to the barn to feed the cows, to give them water, to try to milk them. He said he couldn't leave the cows without food and water. Eileh Ezkerah, for these I recall.
Eileh Ezkerah, Benafshi Allah yesh becha, al koroteinu hamarot, einai zolgot ima.
Kinneret Gat, 67, was murdered on Kibbutz Be'eri. Her daughter Carmel Gat and daughter-in-law Yarden Roman Gat, who were visiting Kinneret and her husband Eshel for Simchat Torah, were both kidnapped that day. Yarden was released on November 29th. Carmel was murdered by Hamas in captivity, her body retrieved in September. Kinneret's son Alon and his 3-year-old daughter Geffen were also seized by terrorists, but were able to escape their captors and remained free. From text messages in the family WhatsApp group that were pieced together after the attack, the family understood that Kinneret had motioned to Eshel to stay hidden in the bathroom, where he happened to be when the terrorists burst into their house. He survived despite terrorists spraying their house with bullets and trying to set it alight. After being dragged from the house, Kinneret was seen in videos that surfaced in the days after the attack with her hands tied, walking alongside elderly residents being led by Hamas fighters through the kibbutz before they were shot. Her death was finally confirmed in December. Eileh Ezkerah, for these I recall.
Eileh Ezkerah, Menachem Allah yesh becha, al koroteinu hamarot, Eileh zolgot ima.
We'll close with a poem called Mothers, Imahot by Osnat Eldar. They are gathering at night, one by one. She whose daughter was abducted and her blood-stained picture doesn't allow her any peace. She whose son fell in battle. She whose children will remain forever in the little safe room in the corner of the house on the kibbutz. She who remained mute on the other end of the line, scratching the horrors onto her skin. She who whispered from time to him or to her, I love you, I am with you, I am here. Hello? She who wasn't able to say goodbye. She who was holding onto a fragment of a film clip showing him alive. She who woke up on Shabbat with the knowledge of death germinating within her. At night, in my darkened room, they are wandering in circles. Drooped shoulders, restless, sleep-crazed, mothers. If only they could change places with the boy or girl ready for captivity or death. Mothers, not yet used to wandering. They come to me at night, one by one. I am hugging them with compassion, with longing, absorbing into my body the feelings of guilt, the helplessness, the abyss, and caressing silently their new maternal title imposed on them. Eileh Ezkerah, for these I recall.
Eileh Ezkerah, Menachem Allah yesh becha, al koroteinu hamarot, Eileh zolgot ima.
We rise for the mourner's Kaddish. Yitgadal v'yitkadash shemei Rabbah, be'alma divrach kirutei ve'amlich malchutei, b'chayechon u'vyomechon u'v'chayei dechol Beit Yisrael, ba'agala u'vizman kariv v'imru amen. Yehei shmei Rabbah mevorach le'olam u'lemei omaya. Yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitpa'ar v'yitromam v'yitnaseh. V'yithadar v'yitaleh v'yithalal shmei dekudusha b'rechu. Leila leila mikol birchata v'shirata tush bechata v'nechamata damiran be'alma v'imru amen. Yehei shlama Rabbah min shemaya v'chayim aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael v'imru amen. Oseh shalom mimromav hu ya'aseh shalom aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael v'imru amen.